The Football Trash Talk for Real Fans podcast is an unscripted and free-flowing conversation that may touch on mature subjects. While the opinions are real, the research probably isn't, and we can't help that Atticus will probably talk about the Knicks.
And here we go.
He trucked dudes. It wasn't just in a preseason game. He did it pretty consistently. He left dudes saying, "What happened?"
You better put some respect on his name when we're talking about the champion, the Davion Clowney.
And I'm just going on eye test here, right? Like, I like the look of this coaching staff, you know?
All right, enough of this. Let's see what kind of shit we get into today.
Are you high?
Loy, it's all yours.
Back for a Football Trash Talk for Real Fans podcast number 20, i.e. skipped 19 with the video. If you're watching this, you can get the link to
Wait, what happened with that video?
I never pressed record. That was my fault. You threw me off with something. So
it's always my fault.
It is well, you're the Cleveland Brown fan of the bunch, so you know it's gotta be your fault.
I always blame my co-host for anything that goes wrong, so I get it.
Whoa. Let's get one thing straight. Anyway, so joining us today, as promised for the 20th podcast, we have Andy here from Rate My League. Andy, thanks for joining us, and shout out to Brandon Gorky for helping set this up. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what Rate My League does, and what you ultimately want it to be.
Yeah, so Rate My League, if you don't know, it's a kind of a uniquely positioned podcast, I guess you can call it. But basically, we get leagues to send us information there. Basically, all you have to do is send us the league ID. Every commissioner site has an ID number. You just send us that, and my co-host and I will produce a usually about an hour-long podcast just previewing your season, your league season. We have essentially an algorithm I built that actually ranks all of the teams in your league based on, especially for dynasty leagues, we'll base the rankings on redraft value, dynasty value, future draft capital, and then a little bit of like how we feel about the team, the Rate My League staff ranking. All that gets boiled down into a team score, which is out of 10, and that's how we rank all the squads. So it's kind of fun because a lot of if you go online, and there's other like league analyzer tools out there, but most of them are very limited. They'll just sort of look at your roster and maybe give you a dynasty value for the roster or whatever. But this one combines, I think, all of the important things that go into sort of an overall power ranking for your league. So that's kind of the idea, and it's a commissioned service, so there's like no ads or anything. You're paying us to give you that show that goes directly to you.
So just so I understand, we actually have a Football Trash Talk fantasy league, for lack of a better title for it. And so for a small fee, I could basically have you professionally do a professional thing on how much I'm going to kick Mike's ass's team in fantasy football is what you're saying.
Pretty much, except I will say, like, we don't adjust anything by hand. So we do sometimes we'll get requests, like, can you really, like, make fun of this guy, like this guy's team? And I'll be like, sure. And then we do the report, and it's like, he's ranked number 3. That's pretty good. I'll try to make fun of him, but I'm not going to lie. So
Chris is just salty because, you know, I have consistently been in the playoffs of our league. So, you know, what Mike always leaves out is I too have consistently been in the playoffs. The one year I wasn't was the year I was in the hospital and high on opioids. That's a whole nother story. I don't do opioids. I should probably clarify that.
Yeah,
but
that's how you lead. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I was in the hospital. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
They gave me the opioids. It wasn't because I was on opioids.
Usually the excuse is more like, I just had a kid and I didn't pay attention. I was taking care of my offspring or whatever. Like, that's a lame excuse too, but that's the one I hear the most.
Yeah, I have no kid. My cat nudges me. He's the closest living kid I have. So we also I was telling Mike that you are the first Tennessee Titans fan we found in the wild. So
I should clarify, I am not a Tennessee Titans fan much as I'm someone who every year I think it's just the jersey. I don't know, something. I look good in blue. I don't know, but I always for whatever reason, like, I have this fetish of taking Titans players, which has worked out because I got like Chris Johnson and Derrick Henry, and every rookie wide receiver they've ever had. Like, I was the biggest Tajay Sharp fan. Like, the only reason there was a Tajay Sharp thing was because I was touting him for like the entire preseason. And obviously my boy Kendall Wright. So I have the Kendall Wright jersey. I loved him. And then 2 years ago, I'm looking at AJ Brown and I'm like, I really love AJ Brown. And then I was saying to myself, no, you just like him because he's a Titan. There's no reason to take AJ Brown. So I talked myself out of taking AJ Brown, and that has come back to bite me. So now I'm back to always taking Titans. I'm just always Des Fitzpatrick will be on every one of my team.
Who is your team then?
I'm such a weird. So I grew up an Eagles fan. I'm in the Philadelphia area, so that's kind of my home team. That said, I'm an NFL guy. Like, I'm a fantasy football guy. I watch 6 games at once. And usually the Eagles are only on because they're one of the locally broadcast games. But if they weren't, they're not one of the games I'd be watching often. Like, it just sort of is random. I like fantasy football. I'm such a weird, atypical fan.
Okay, so you tend to follow like players per se more than like a specific team.
Yeah, I have 3 jerseys. I have a Kendall Wright jersey. I have an Anquan Boldin jersey. Anquan Boldin is my favorite player of all time. I can argue. We can spend 30 minutes talking about why Anquan Boldin should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm ready to go there if we get to that. And then I just picked up a Justin Jefferson jersey because I drafted Jefferson in all 3 of my dynasty leagues last year. Actually, I drafted him in 1 and traded for him in the other 2. So I have Jefferson in all 3 leagues, and I'm ready to talk about how awesome I am for getting him everywhere as well. So I have his jersey. I'm not going to wear that one until my home league draft. I'm going to break that out for that one, I think.
I like it. Go ahead, Mike.
I also picked up Jefferson, and I too am a genius for doing so.
Exactly. We're all genius. If you got him, you're perfect.
And as far as Anquan Boldin goes, maybe not my favorite all time, but like stud.
Unbelievable player.
The game that he had his jaw broke and held on to the ball in the end zone for the touchdown.
That was against the Jets.
Mm-hmm. I was like, good Lord, this guy is a beast.
And he came back like 3 weeks later and basically maintained the same pace with a plate in his face for the rest of the season. It was crazy. It's crazy.
I mean, I've always, I know it's kind of a cop out and the easy answer to take. It's like liking the Beatles, but I've always been a LaDainian Tomlinson fan. To a point where I actually tracked down his TCU jersey, so that's one of my one of my non-brown jerseys I have. I track that down, so I have that.
Actually, it's funny. My home dynasty league started in 2002, and I traded for Tomlinson that year. So it wasn't his rookie year; that was his second year. But I had him for his entire Chargers career, and then I traded him away when he was a Jet. So I had LaDainian Tomlinson. I mean, he's an all-time favorite as well. Like, I would joke with my then girlfriend, like, I'm not going to leave you, but if LaDainian Tomlinson wanted me, that's the only route I would go, I think. So,
sounds like my girlfriend and Randall Cobb of all players. That being said, hi, sweetie. She's like one of our only listeners. No, but so since you did wear a Titans jersey,
yes,
I had prepared a couple Titans questions because they have had some moves recently. So with Julio Jones going to the Titans, how do you see those affecting, numbers for him, for Tannehill, for Brown, and maybe to a lesser extent Henry? How do you see Julio Jones fantasy wise going on in Tennessee there?
So it's such a weird because so they lost obviously Jonnu Smith and they lost Corey Davis, so they definitely had some vacated targets there. Julio Jones comes in. People talk about like the alpha, right? Like, those are 2 alphas. AJ Brown's an alpha and Julio Jones is an alpha. I've conflicted feelings about what it means for the Titans because Tennessee's defense was really awful last year. I think I'm a big DVOA guy, the Football Outsiders. I think they were like 29th or something in DVOA last year, but they still obviously have Derrick Henry, so they still ran the ball a lot. If you look at their running in neutral situations, they're still going to be one of the highest in that category. So I think maybe it's an indication that they are going to become a little bit more balanced on offense, which you would think would be bad for Henry overall. But that said, with Henry, he's had so many carries. I do worry about workload with him in general. I know everyone wants to say, "Oh, this guy's different. Like he can handle 350 carries a year because he's so big." But like Earl Campbell, like going back to the Houston or Tennessee or whatever, like Earl Campbell, everyone said, "Oh, he's huge. He's a big guy. He can handle those carries." But he broke down after a high carry season and basically had a very short apex of his career. So I mean, I'm someone who has always been in that 370 curse. If you've ever heard of like the curse of 370 carries, I've always been mindful of that. That said, I think I've come back down a little bit from that. It's not as maybe black and white as I would have liked to have talked about it, because carries still matter. And even if a guy is maybe less efficient, if he's getting 300 and some odd carries, he's still going to be a fine fantasy play. So basically, I think at the end of the day, I'm holding Julio Jones's value where it was, which I think was, I'd have to check, but like wide receiver 12 or something.
He was, I know we've been doing mock fantasy drafts on like ESPN, and he's typically around pick 45, give or take.
Okay.
So
I'm happy to hold his value there. I think AJ Brown's value probably has to come down slightly, just because I think maybe he's going to lose some targets, even though he's a very highly efficient player in general. That's why I'm not going to go overboard with him. I'm still happy to have him, and I think his dynasty value should stay the same because Julio's probably going to slow down a little bit. Henry, I you know, everyone's going to take a little bit of a hit with Julio there. I just think Henry's carries are going to come down. I don't know if it's even Julio being there that hurts Henry as much as just there's going to be some regression for him naturally anyway. So, you know, like his consensus value to me is a little high. He's still like running back 3 or something for redraft value, and his dynasty value, I think Henry's dynasty value is the most fascinating, one of the most fascinating discussions you can have in dynasty circles right now, because I was talking, I talk in this like dynasty Discord server, and it comes up sometimes because, you know, his consensus dynasty value is something like running back 6 or 7, which I understand. I think it's a little high, but I understand it because if you're a contender, there aren't a ton of guys who are more valuable to you at running back than Derrick Henry. But if you're in a rebuild, like I've seen people rank him in dynasty like running back 22 or something like that, because he only has 1 season left, maybe 1 or 2 seasons left, and there's a bunch of younger guys who are coming in who are going to be passing him. If you're in a rebuild, he's running back 22. If you're a contender, he's running back 6. I think both of those are completely defensible. So, you know, his value is all over the place anyway for dynasty. And Tannehill, it has to help. You know, having Julio there is great. Ferkser or whoever is probably fine. Like whoever is going to get the tight end targets is going to be fine, because no one's going to cover him anyway, and this just further is like no one's going to cover him. So that's all good for me. I guess that's it. I don't know. Is there anyone?
What are your overall? So one of the, like I kind of alluded to, one of the ongoing discussions we've had this year, which kind of came out of nowhere, and just every week we kind of somehow managed to touch on it. What are your thoughts of Ryan Tannehill, both as just like a player in general, a fantasy producer, and an all-around human being? What do you make of Ryan Tannehill? Because when we were looking at it, you know, I forget how it started, but we were talking about our fantasy draft a few podcasts ago, and I kind of said something along the lines of Ryan Tannehill's like, he surprised you because he's a quarterback no one would ever think to draft. So you can get him in like the 10th, 11th round and no problem, because no one ever thinks of Ryan Tannehill, but he turns out to be one of the top 5 QBs every year. So how do you think? Do you see him having another type of year like that? Do you put more stock in Tannehill than maybe some of us do, or what are your takes on Ryan Tannehill in general?
Yeah. So, well, the first thing, I mean, as someone who is as anti-Adam Gase as there is in the world. I'm always willing to take a bet on someone who no longer has to deal with Adam Gase in their life. So I was always a little bit, I wouldn't say I was overboard on Tannehill, but I would, again, if you get away from Gase, I'm willing to give you a shot. So that's the first thing. He's super efficient. He's very accurate. I'm not an expert in this, but like he reminds me a little bit of like Chad Pennington, like just a super accurate passer who isn't necessarily going to fling the ball super, like he doesn't have the biggest arm. But he's also in such a perfect situation now where, I mean, we'll see how it is this year with Julio there and the passing game getting a lot more respect than probably it has. But with Derrick Henry being the focal point of every defensive meeting that the team is going to have leading up to a game, you're just going to have a lot of openings for your quarterback. So I think his value is going to be more in line this year with where he ends up. He was quarterback 11 last I checked, and I think it's going to keep trending into the top 10. I wouldn't be surprised if he's like quarterback 8 or 9 at the start of the season. And I'm comfortable with taking him at that point. I don't think he's going to be the value he was the last couple of years, though. I think that's ultimately where I am with him.
So I think it's interesting that you mentioned a couple things, right? Like I have Derrick Henry on my dynasty league, and I kind of contend, but there's a team or two that are just on paper they're better, right? So unless the ball bounces a certain way, like I'm not going to win the championship, right? Like I've come to that, but I have Derrick Henry, and I'm like, do I let him go? Do I get the value for him right now? And I'm leaning yes if someone puts together the right package, because it's just one of those things where you mentioned it. You mentioned Earl Campbell. We had a very similar conversation a couple of weeks ago where I think I mentioned Earl Campbell. When you have 350 plus and then the 2K season, it's usually not a bright turnaround the next season.
Yeah.
It's just not, and Derrick Henry is an absolute beast, but, the body is the body and it's going to break down. So I found that interesting. And with, with the addition of Julio Jones, maybe he becomes a little bit more of a decoy, right? Like Tannehill is efficient, right? Like 3,800 yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, top 5 QBR, so he is effectively a game manager. And, I think with Julio, they have an extra option when they get into the red zone, right? Like he's tall, he's lanky, he catches the ball well. He's not Corey Davis, and I'm just going to slam Corey Davis because I've been burned by him in multiple fantasy.
Oh yeah, don't worry, a Titans wide receiver, I took him.
Yeah, that's Mac All-Star Corey Davis. Let's put some respect on his name. Yeah.
It's, and you mentioned like he goes from running back 22 if you're in a rebuild. Otherwise, he's a running back 3. That's quite a disparity for someone to kind of flip-flop back and forth and go with. So, we'll see.
And that's what makes ultimately that's what makes Dynasty so fun, because everyone is in different situations. You can't just look at it from one angle and say, oh, his Dynasty ranking is this. Right. Well, it's this for that person, but it's something else for another team in your league. So, yeah, I think whatever decision you make with Henry, I wouldn't knock it. I mean, it depends on who you get back, obviously, if you traded him, but I would not knock the theory behind it.
Well, I'm going into it with the mindset of a Herschel Walker type of trade. So, if somebody wants him that bad, it's going to take him over the top. They're going to pay heavily.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whenever we talk about trades, we talk about trades all the time on these podcasts that we do, because, it's one of the most fun parts of fantasy football, obviously. But too often I see people trade a stud, like an alpha, and not get trade them for, I always say this, like if you put it into a trade calculator and you get back even value for some stud, you did not win the trade. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. If you're trading the big name guy, I want to win the trade because you're going to have demand. So you should win the trade.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to get your take on, well, first of all, just because Mike is a big Eagles fan and he gives me crap about the Browns all the time, outside of Miles Sanders, is it even worth my time to consider any Eagles player? I know Hertz is getting some he's actually his projections are good.
Yeah.
He's going later. But outside of Miles Sanders, do I even waste my time evaluating Eagles for my fantasy team this year before the 16th round?
Well, Hertz is the one who jumps to mind. We've seen a lot of dual threat quarterbacks jump up and have not just like good seasons, but like league altering seasons. Lamar Jackson, obviously Patrick Mahomes. Even before that, Deshaun Watson, his rookie year before he got hurt, was on an incredible pace. And then Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and even Kyler Murray last year. So fantasy's going that way with quarterbacks, where if you're a dual threat who can add touchdowns in on the ground, it's hard. I mean, it's just really hard for non-mobile quarterbacks who are young, especially younger non-mobile quarterbacks, to have huge seasons like that. Like even Justin Herbert, who had a great year last year, he's quarterback 8 right now in consensus value. He doesn't probably have the ceiling that Jalen Hurts has. Is his floor a lot higher than Hurts? Sure. So if you can get Hurts later, I would definitely consider that. And obviously, Zach Ertz is not long for the Eagles, it seems. So Dallas Goedert is a guy to jump on, I think, for the right value. I'm not sure he's like a game changer, but for the value, I think Goddard is nice enough. I'm not a Jalen Reagor guy. I'm not a huge Devontae Smith guy. That's just me. Smith, I think, has a wide range of possibilities. He's a very unique prospect. The size definitely scares me. This, I don't know if it was a late breakout as much as things are so weird in college football with everything with the pandemic. I don't know how much to take away from everything, but you do look at that. But the size, and I'm willing to let someone else take the risk on Devontae Smith. And if I miss out, I miss out. That's how I feel about that.
I'm gonna, being an Eagle fan, I'm gonna disagree with that, right? Like I thought size too, right? When they drafted him, I mean, you got to be happy because it's a Heisman Trophy winner. He had a phenomenal season. His half in the championship game was one for the ages. I've never seen anything like that before. But it was the size, and I did some digging though. Like the year prior, he's never missed a game, and then the year when everybody was there, he was still the number one target, right? Like when they still had Waddle there, he was still the number one target. So it's not like he hasn't taken hits. He is playing in the SEC, it's a big boy league. So it's and he just seems to have the right demeanor. Does that mean I'm going to take a flyer and draft him way too early? No, not going to happen, right? Like every mock draft I've seen has him going like end of second, middle third, somewhere around there, and like that's just too early for me. Mm-hmm. Way too early.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it comes down to value. Again, I think his ceiling is high. Like I'm willing to say that as much as I think I can look at film and whatever, like I'm willing to say that I'm not the best film expert in the world, and I'm not the best analytical expert in the world. So I'm willing to, accept this idea that he could, like his ceiling is probably higher. I think his ceiling is higher probably than Waddle's. I think his ceiling could be higher than Bateman. I really like Bateman. So, I look at a lot of rookie dynasty drafts, and right now Smith tends to go around 6 or 7 in a lot of these drafts. And Bateman is going like 9, 10. Waddle usually in that range also, maybe a little bit in between. I like Bateman for the value better than I like Smith's value right now. But I do think, like, I'm not going to outright say that I think he's a bust. I just think he's got a high ceiling and a low floor, and he scares me a little bit. And I'm not in it for the risk on him. So I'm happy to let someone else take the risk. If it got to like 9 or 10 and he's still there and Bateman isn't, like if for some reason he fell, I would at that point be like, okay, that's the area where the risk makes sense to me.
So go ahead, Mike. Sorry. Go ahead.
So you mentioned Deshaun Watson, and that's an interesting name as well. I haven't heard much about his legal troubles recently. Like, how much does that play and factor into everything? Like, I haven't even heard possible suspension for him yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a legal expert. I have tried to like get the opinions of legal experts. Like I've tried to actually, people like on Twitter, you'll see lawyers having sort of AMAs or like Twitter threads about the situation. I can only relay what they say. Most of the lawyers seem to think that most of the lawyers I've talked to who are football fans seem to think he's not going to be playing football in 2021. And, maybe he'll be back for 2022. I'm like more cynical in general. Like I'm a cynical person. And that makes me think that maybe he will play in 2021 because the NFL, I just don't trust them to do the right thing in general. Whether you morally are okay having Deshaun Watson on your fantasy team, I have him on one team and I'm holding him. I don't want to sell him. I've seen people, I've been in leagues where he's been sold for undervalue because of the situation. And I understand if you're like morally opposed to having Deshaun Watson on your team and you just want him off of your roster, I totally get it. Like go with your moral compass. But for me personally, I'm just holding at this point. Personally, I wouldn't be shocked if he got like an 8 or 9 game suspension. I don't like half a season suspension wouldn't be the biggest shock to me. If he settles these cases, the one thing I have seen lawyers say is if he's got to settle the cases before like we get to the point where they really need to go to training camp and all that. If that happens and he can sit down with the NFL and get a half season suspension, I think it's possible. I think a full season suspension is entirely possible as well. I would not even venture a guess as to like how it's going to go with the NFL. I just in general, Tyreek Hill didn't get suspended at all, right? Like, yeah. There's audio. Like I'm a cynical person. So
I mean, if we go apples to apples too, right? Like it's not entirely apples, but Robert Kraft got a slap on the wrist, for his indulgence in massage parlors.
And there's video of that too, supposedly. Not that I want to see it, but like, yeah, I hate when we do these shows. We get to the Watson team, and you have to talk about it, but I hate talking about it because it's not going anywhere. It's just story that is just going to linger and linger and linger, and it's just I hate it. It's the worst part of fantasy football, dealing with like these off-field legal issues they're awful. Like everything about it is terrible, and it makes you mad and upset. I hate it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of excuse me, when Adrian Peterson did what hit his kid with a switch or whatever, and after Googling and figuring out what a switch was, I remember in one of the leagues I was in, this is before I knew Mike and everything. But one of the leagues I was in, I was contemplating like the guy that had Adrian Peterson, because he was facing a 4-game suspension or whatever it was trying to sell him get rid of him really cheap. And I'm going, okay, I can get him for this and this. And I'm like, I was working this straight out in my head, and I was like, and maybe they only do 2 games. And I was thinking, wait a minute, we're talking about a guy that literally beat his kid. This is not the level of depth and complexity I want for my fantasy football leagues. I just want to watch the games on Sunday. So I totally hear what you're.
And what's interesting, I mean, especially for Dynasty, I don't know, like you're like redraft versus Dynasty. I don't know what kind of.
We're a redraft.
Okay, but for Dynasty, I think I'm someone who in general probably pays more attention to the off-field stuff than most people, because I think it matters more than people give credence to it. Like Tyreek Hill is the #1 dynasty wide receiver right now in consensus value. He's not my #1 dynasty wide receiver because if the off-field stuff rears its head again, he could get a longer suspension than he otherwise would. So I think it does matter. Like it's something that you have to pay attention to, in addition to the sort of you have to be okay with it from a moral compass perspective. Like it's a more interesting thing than I think a lot of people give credit to.
So I'm going to just kind of take the chance here to pivot a little out of the heavy stuff and get you kind of more on some lightning questions here. What rebounding superstar, a la an OBJ, someone like that, do you see having the biggest bounce back here?
Well, I mean, can I say Saquon? I mean, Saquon is the the talent for me. I mean, Christian McCaffrey probably is the guy, like he's ranked number 1 and they're not talking about limiting his carries. But as a fan, I love watching Saquon. Saquon is unlike anything I've seen before. So if he's healthy and I can watch him play football, I'll be the happiest dude. Like even if you took fantasy football out of it, it's not often I would say that, but just watching him run, when he accelerates and he's like at a different speed from everyone else on the field, that's I love running backs. I love watching running backs. I haven't seen anyone like him. So, and I've said this before, like I think take the injuries out of it, take all the, take everything out of it. I don't think I've seen a more talented, purely talented running back than Saquon Barkley in the history of the NFL. And I don't say that lightly. Like I've watched all these guys. I went to the library and found this book about like the best running backs in NFL history from like 1975, and it's going all the way back to like Jim Thorpe and all this, and I've never seen anything like Saquon. If he's healthy, he's unbelievable. So I just want to see him healthy. Wide receiver, am I missing anyone obvious? Like Odell Beckham is another guy who, like, maybe because you mentioned him, he just came to the forefront, but he got injured last year, and he's another guy who I still believe in his talent. I'm not ready to dismiss him. So I think he's like wide receiver 25 or something, 27 maybe in redraft value right now. I take a flyer on him too.
You kind of answered my next question already, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyway. Bigger year, Saquon Barkley or Ezekiel Elliott?
Yeah, I mean, look, if he's the cop-out answer is if he's healthy or if they get equal number of carries, I'm taking Saquon because I believe in his talent level. I think there's obviously much more concern about, we hear the reports that Saquon's going to be sort of eased back into his role, which does scare me a little bit. I don't know what it means. Like I need a definition of what that is. I mean, if I had to choose, I would say Saquon, but
and then
I'll ask some reservation.
I'll ask this one because I'm a Browns fan, and they finished 10-11 last year. Bigger year, Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt?
Oh, Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is such a better player, such a better talent than Kareem Hunt. I love Nick Chubb. I mean, if Saquon's my favorite player to watch, I think Nick Chubb might be number 2 among the running backs. I love watching him play too. I mean, purely as a runner. Hopefully they can get him more involved in the receiving game.
So that was number. So Brown is number 2, and then the first Eagle is number 15. Okay, just wanted to put that on.
I know I'm an Eagles fan, but like the Eagles in general don't. I like Miles Sanders. He's fun to watch, but they don't. And we'll see if Smith. I mean, Smith again. I think he's got a high ceiling, and Hurts is interesting. I don't know. I'm too in it. Like I'm too close to it. I listen to like the sports talk radio here, and I'm mad. Every time I listen to sports talk radio, I'm like, this guy's an idiot. And I'm talking like the hosts are idiots, the callers are idiots. It just makes me upset, and I don't want to watch the Eagles. I don't know. I'm too close to it.
On Philly sports radio.
Who do I listen to Missinelli. Yeah. Probably the most. 97.5, the ESPN station. I'm a big Sixers fan. So like football, I'm an Eagles fan second. I'm an NFL fan first, but my real homer fandom is with the Sixers. And at least 97.5 is a little bit more realistic with the Sixers. Like WIP is just, those guys are idiots.
See, I live in Orlando. We don't believe in things like sports talk radio down here because we have the Magic, which are as close to like caution may contain NBA-like substance, but that's about it.
When I was growing up, I was a weird kid. Like I was 5 years old and I would go to bed with the sports talk radio on and not like music or anything else. I'd be listening to sports talk radio as I fell asleep. So yeah, the first signed thing I ever got was something by Gene Hart, who was the Flyers play-by-play guy. I had a Post-it note of Gene Hart's signature. So that was me as a kid.
Going back to bounce back years, 2 quarterbacks, and just because you mentioned Gase earlier, Sam Darnold. What do you think?
Again, I go back. If a player was dealing with Adam Gase and then suddenly is not dealing with Adam Gase, I'm willing to take a flyer on that. I'm not the biggest Sam Darnold fan. I like Tannehill more than I like Tannehill before he became a starter again, better than I like Darnold now. The Panthers team as a whole is kind of I don't like them as much as other people. I think Christian McCaffrey is a little bit overrated in general. I say that with trepidation because I don't want to anger people, but like, you know, he's a dual threat. He's a great player, but I don't think he's as purely good as a runner as he maybe gets credit for. They certainly, I mean, DJ Moore is a talent I like. So, I mean, if he's starting, he's going to be usable at times, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure how many years he's going to be a starter. I would be out in general on Darnold.
Okay.
Well, not to get any personal advice, just because you're touching on Christian McCaffrey, but not to get any not that I have any skin in this question, but if you were in a redraft league and you had the number 1 overall pick, is it anyone but Christian McCaffrey?
Man,
any chance?
What's funny this year, hate's a strong word. I am liking the value of the like 11 to 20 running backs more than I like the value of the 1 to 10 running backs this year. This is very strange. Like other than Saquon, especially with the news that came out, his value is kind of dropping. I would not knock you for taking Christian McCaffrey number 1 overall. That's his consensus value. There's a reason he's the consensus number 1. When he was healthy last year, he was producing as a number 1 player. So, I mean, that's completely legitimate. If I was drafting right now, it's weird. I don't think I'd want the number 1 pick. I don't think I'd want a top 5 pick. I would rather pick in the end of the first round where you maybe would get either 2 later running backs, or you can even go, I mean, this is crazy, but like you could go Kelsey, right? Like how many leagues did Kelsey win last year? A ton. Like all of my leagues, the Kelsey team was in the title game, if nothing else. So I don't think you can completely discount that. So if you can get him late in the first round, I like that value better than I like having to take one of those top ranked running backs right now who, you know, Kamara's situation is weird with who's going to be the quarterback there. And McCaffrey coming off of the injury, Saquon coming off of the injury. I know his value slipped a little bit, but all those guys, even like Jonathan Taylor, who's moving up, I love Jonathan Taylor. I'm a big speed score guy, and he had a huge speed score last year. But he scares me a little bit because his schedule, I mean, when it comes to strength of schedule, I never look forward. I always look backwards. You know, so much changes in the NFL. When you look ahead and you say, oh, he's got the toughest running back schedule this year. And then by the end of the year, like, no, he didn't. His schedule was super easy. When you go backwards and look at Jonathan Taylor's schedule from last year, not only was it the easiest schedule in the league last year, it might have been one of the easiest schedules in the last 20 years that any running back ever had. He played the AFC South as his division. So he played 3 of the worst defenses in the league twice. The Titans, the Jaguars, and the Texans. 3 of the 4 worst defenses in the league last year. And who was the worst defense in the league last year? Detroit. He played Detroit. His schedule was nuts. I mean, he played Detroit. He played Minnesota. I love Jonathan Taylor. I have Jonathan Taylor concerns. So that's a long way of saying, yeah, go with McCaffrey, I guess. But like, man, I'd be rolling the dice that I get a later first round pick instead of a high first round pick.
Does Carson Wentz change your thoughts on Jonathan Taylor at all?
No, is he a better quarterback than Phillip Rivers? Yes. Is he like a markedly different kind of quarterback than Phillip Rivers? I don't know. I think the game plan for the Colts is going to be more or less the same. He can be a little bit more effective, maybe with his downfield passing than Rivers was. Not that, I mean, Wentz had downfield passing when he was young, but it seemed to have escaped him a little bit. I think the Colts mesh well with Wentz's talent a little bit. I think Wentz is a quarterback who needs to throw to an open receiver rather than a quarterback who's willing to throw a receiver open, if that makes sense. So a guy like Hilton, I think could do really well with Wentz because he's a guy who does well sitting in zones And like Michael Pittman is a guy who can get open a little bit. So I like, I think they mesh well with his talent level. Whereas like Allen Robinson, you just throw the ball. I'm not Allen Robinson. When Alshon Jeffrey was complaining all the time, Alshon Jeffrey is a guy who like Nick Foles would just throw the ball up to. He wasn't even open, and he would go get it. Like Wentz would never throw that ball because he's not open. Wentz throws to an open receiver if he's there. He'll hold the ball longer if he needs to wait for a guy to get open. I think that meshes better with the Colts personnel, but does it impact Jonathan Taylor as much? I don't know. I don't change my opinion on Jonathan Taylor based on Wentz. I'll put it that way.
The last question I want to ask before we kind of hit you with some curveballs here. Which rookie? You mentioned a couple of the rookie wide receivers. You got Pitts out there in Atlanta. Which rookie do you possibly see having a good, if not outstanding year, maybe getting drafted a little bit later than they should be, despite being a rookie?
Yeah, so Bateman's the one who jumps out at me as a guy who's going to be drafted late because people don't like his situation. But his situation, people mistake what you look for in a situation, especially with rookies. For a rookie wide receiver, what makes a good situation for me is a guy who's going to get on the field. That's the biggest thing. And we can talk about what happened with Justin Jefferson last year, where people thought it was a bad situation because, Minnesota doesn't throw the ball a lot and Kirk Cousins isn't the best quarterback in the world. Kirk Cousins is probably better than people think, but it doesn't matter that they didn't throw the ball a lot because if he gets on the field, I'd rather have a guy who I believe in talent-wise get on the field for a worse offense than take a situational player who, you think things are going to go well because he's in a high-flying offense. Yeah, there's other wide receivers there, but, enough balls to go around. I look at Rashad Bateman's situation and I say, who the hell else do they have? Marquise Brown, sure, he's going to be on the field. And then Mark Andrews. Who else is getting targets there? Like Miles Boykin? I know they don't pass the ball a ton, and I know that Lamar Jackson is not the most proficient passer in the league, but give me a guy who's going to be on the field, and maybe they pass the ball more because they have a guy who can get open a little bit better. I think that's a good situation. That's the guy that I would be targeting later in my redraft leagues.
You got anything else, Mike, before I hit him with the with the question of all questions?
No, hit it.
All right, so we're gonna ask you to take your fantasy guru hat off and put on the love guru hat. So so this podcast is a byproduct of a Facebook group that we're in called Football Trash Talk for Real Fans, and every year, the core group of people that do most of the posting. So me, Mike, Atticus, who's usually on this podcast, is not here today.
Someone named Atticus.
Yeah. Yes, he's normally the third guy that's passed. He's been MIA. He's been sulking a little bit since the Knicks lost. So
is that his real name?
That is his real name.
I love the name Atticus. Atticus is one of my favorite names. So there you go.
Well, see, Atticus, you could have gotten some love today if you would have came on from the Love Guru.
Great name.
So, but anyway, so every year they've had a barbecue for various reasons. Like I mentioned earlier, I was in the hospital, then COVID, I've been in the group 4 years and have never made it to one of these barbecues. So I was dead set on going to the barbecue this year. My girlfriend, it's not a CrossFit gym. It's just like an Olympic weightlifting gym. And their whole thing is these competitions. So she recently moved down to Orlando, joined this gym, and her coach finally talked her into doing a competition. Well, it turns out, of course, the competition, her first one, is on the same weekend as the barbecue, which is up in your neck of the woods, up in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, where it's at Atticus's house this year. So, of course, my initial reaction was, well, guys, I'd like to go, but obviously I'm going to go, support my girlfriend. She, though, without no prompting for me, didn't say anything about it. She goes, you've been talking about this thing for a year. I want you to go to that. Don't worry about it. There's going to be other competitions, blah, 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 blah. My question for you, how big of a trap is this? And what shirt should I wear to her competition? What color shirt do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. My wife is very into like flag spinning like competitions. So, and like they do rifles and flags and all that. So I've definitely gone to a lot of those things. It's never conflicted with a barbecue or anything like that. So I've never had this kind of situation before. I mean,
and just to set the stage at the barbecue, this is where we live draft our fantasy football teams. We were talking about doing a podcast live all together in the same room. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot going on.
How often are there competitions?
So I'm not 100% sure. It depends. So it kind of depends depending on if she places or how well she does at this one. Then there's a Masters one out in Utah later in the year. Don't know exactly when that would be, but I think it's like late October-ish, something like that. If she doesn't place in this one, I think they do another one in 3 months. So that would be August, September. So it would be that she'd skip the Masters.
The competitions happen more often than the barbecue, right?
Yes, it's once every quarter, give or take, for the competitions. Is what it sounds like.
You have to take that into account. I feel like.
Yeah,
I feel like you have to build a case. You're not just. This is not some like making a decision. You have to become a lawyer, and you have to build the case. The good news is she's your girlfriend and not your wife. Because if she was your wife, then you have to keep up with that. You can't just like, it depends. I guess if you've been married for like 30 years, whatever. But like, if you have a new wife, that's tougher than if it's a girlfriend. She's still trying to like not scare you off, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, and I will say this in the defense, we have. So because she joined this gym, there was a competition 2-3 weeks ago that she wasn't even in. We just went and watched a weightlifting competition to support her team.
Yeah.
So I've already been to one with her on a Saturday night.
You're building the case.
So,
you're building.
Yeah.
And I will say the fact that she's lifting, like Olympic lifting, that's a little scarier. Like that's. I didn't think about that at first, but she could really. I mean.
That's the thing too, because of my medical history, one solid punch to the stomach, and
yeah, I mean,
so
good. I mean, you have to take that into account.
I mean, look, that we had to cancel last year as well. So like, this is the first barbecue post COVID.
If I'm a judge, I'm giving you a pass on going to the barbecue. I'm biased. I'm a fantasy football guy. Like I love the stories of. We have one league that they're all veterans and they get together every year they like get a cabin or something. Like they go and they have like a ton of guys who they do their draft. They have like a fun, get together. That is super awesome. And I love hearing stories like that. So I'm a little bit biased because I, fantasy football holds a certain prestige for me that probably other people doesn't. But I think you'd be okay. But again, my wife doesn't do Olympic lifting, so I don't have that fear instilled in me. That's a little
well, there you have it, Liesel. Andy, can you spell your last name for me so she can track you down?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I know better than that.
So there you go. It's been settled. Andy, go ahead and plug your website one more time. We'll get out of here on that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's ratemyleague.com. And so there's actually two things you can do there. One is free and one there's a charge for, but basically we are professional league rankers, league analyzers, so you can get your whole league ranked on a hour-long podcast. That's something that you would get charged for. But you can also go to Rate My League and click on the report tab up top, and you can actually put your league ID in and get a pretty lengthy, detailed PDF league analysis for free. So it's kind of cool. You get to see where you rank in your league, and it uses all of those dynasty, redraft, future draft capital, all that stuff in the ranking. So it's kind of fun. There's charts and graphs and things. So I'm pretty proud of that. But yeah, looking forward to a good year.
Yeah, well, we appreciate you taking time out of your Sunday to come chat with us. Yeah, like I said, if anytime you want to come on in the future, just let us know. We'd love to have you back. Maybe a little bit. Maybe we can do like a mid-season redraft kind of thing or something like that. So
for sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. We appreciate it today. That's 20 in the books, Mike. We're doing it.
That's 20 in the books.
Wow.
Like and subscribe below. Please hit that button. Again, thank you for coming on. We'll have to get you an invite if you're on Facebook to the Trash Talk group.
Okay.
It gets fun, especially during the season. a little raunchy, but it's never personal.
It's a lot of NFC East talk. So
good.
A lot of NFC East talk.
That's where the real fans are. I'm sorry.
Don't pander to
That wraps up our show for this week. Thanks for listening.
All right. Well,
Fun
I
fact
said
for you.
the future invite.
With their win over Atlanta last
Anyway,
month, the Knicks ended
we'll
up
go ahead and get out of here on that. I'll
dated
catch you
back
next
to the
week, Mike. Thanks again,
2013
Andy.
Eastern Conference
Take care out there.
Semis against the Pacers. This, however, pales in comparison to the Sacramento Kings, who last won a playoff game in the opening round of the 05-06 playoffs against the San Antonio Spurs.
Anyway, this has been the Football Trash Talk for Real Fans podcast. It's been a pleasure, and as always, F yo team. Stay safe out there.